Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The men leaned forward, elbows pressed to the map spread across steel. Their voices layered, sharp, fast, overlapping. She sat at the far edge, quiet, hands folded, her face shadowed by the humming fluorescent light above. Not one set of eyes drifted toward her. It was as if she didn't exist. And yet, she was the only one who had studied the file for more than a week. The only one who knew the terrain not from maps or satellites, but from footsteps and memory. She had walked those valleys once before, in silence, when the world believed she was nowhere near. Still, she said nothing. The colonel's voice boomed, gravel scraping against metal. Target compound, East Ridge, insert at dawn, extraction point here. His finger stabbed at the paper. Around him, pens scratched notes. The sound of certainty. The sound of men who believed in plans because they had written them themselves. But she knew something they didn't. Something they wouldn't accept if she spoke it aloud. Not yet. Her name was Captain Elena Markovic, though in the field they called her Raven. The nickname stuck not because of her eyes or the dark braid she kept tucked beneath her helmet, but because she carried silence like wings. She moved without sound, saw what others missed, and waited with the patience of shadow. And tonight in this room of voices, she was unseen again. Her gaze slid across the table. The men's faces blurred into one another, lined with fatigue, hardened by years. Each of them had a story. Each had earned scars, but there was a quiet arrogance in the air, the kind that came from never having to prove oneself in a room like this. She could feel it press against her skin. She thought of saying something. She thought of telling them that the East Ridge was a graveyard of sound, that the rocks carried every whisper, every scrape, every misplaced step for miles. She thought of telling them that the villagers who once lived below had vanished not because of war, but because of the silence that waited up there, watching. But instead she remained still, because sometimes silence was the only weapon she had. The briefing ended with clipped orders. Chairs scraped against concrete, boots echoed. Men filed out muttering. Not one of them looked her way. Except him, a younger soldier, barely more than 20. His eyes caught hers for half a breath, uncertain, curious. Then he lowered his gaze and followed the others out. And Elena was left alone with the map. Her fingers hovered over the inked lines. She traced them slowly, as if memory could rise through paper. She felt the cold valley air again, the crunch of frost under boots, the sting of snow on her cheek. She remembered the silence of that ridge, the silence that had taken something from her long ago. She closed the folder. And she whispered, almost to herself, "Not yet." Night fell heavy over the base. The hum of generators filled the air, punctuated by distant laughter, the shuffle of cards, the clink of tin mugs. Somewhere, music played faintly from a radio, crackling, fatting, fighting to be heard. Elena sat outside, boots planted on gravel, rifle across her knees. She wasn't cleaning it, wasn't checking it, just letting the weight of it rest there, heavy and familiar. The sky above was wide and endless, stars scattered like broken glass. She tilted her head back, breathing deep, trying to remember if the sky had ever looked this free when she was a child. She thought of her father then, his voice, rough from cigarettes, telling her stories at the kitchen table. He had been a soldier too, once. Not a celebrated one, not decorated. Just a man who carried orders heavier than his own dreams. He never spoke much about what he had seen, but he carried it in his silence. And she had learned young that silence could be both armor and prison. It was him she thought of when she enlisted. It was him she thought of every time she pulled a trigger. And it was him she thought of now, staring into the night, knowing that tomorrow she would walk into a valley where silence killed faster than bullets. The next morning began with the smell of oil and canvas, the bite of cold air, the roar of engines waiting to lift them into sky. The team gathered by the helipad, faces sharp, gear strapped tight, nerves hidden under banter. Elena adjusted her vest, tightened straps, checked pouches with methodical calm. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic. "Raven." She turned. It was Major Harlan, the man who'd spoken loudest at the briefing, the one whose finger had pressed hardest on the map. His jaw was square, his voice clipped. "You know your role," he said, not a question. A statement as if she were a tool, not a person. She nodded once. "You'll have overwatch from Ridge 2. Hold position, cover the team's entry, simple, don't overcomplicate it." His eyes held hers for a second longer than necessary, as if daring her to object. She didn't. Instead, she said quietly, "Understood." And then she turned away. Inside the helicopter, the air throbbed with vibration. The team sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes hidden behind goggles, faces unreadable. Wind rushed through the open side door, carrying the smell of dust and fuel. Elena sat near the edge, her rifle cradled in her lap. The young soldier from last night sat across from her, fidgeting with his gloves. His name tag read Collins. He glanced up, caught her gaze, then quickly looked down again. She studied him for a moment. The way his hands trembled, the tightness in his jaw. He was green, too green for this. But there was something in his eyes that reminded her of herself long ago. The part of her that had been untested, uncertain, desperate to belong. She wanted to tell him it was okay. That fear was normal. That silence before battle was heavier than the battle itself. But she didn't. The rotor blades thundered overhead, drowning thought. The ground dropped away, the horizon tilted, and the world became nothing but sky and sound. The valley opened beneath them like a wound. Jagged ridges, shadows that swallowed light, rivers frozen in silence. Elena felt her chest tighten. It was the same place, the same ridge, the same silence. Her hand brushed the scar along her rib, hidden under layers of gear, unseen by anyone. She remembered the night she had bled into this soil, the night she had lost more than blood. She closed her eyes for half a second. Then she breathed in, steady, calm. The helicopter banked, rope dropped, boots hit ground, orders snapped through comms. The team moved like shadows into the valley. And Elena climbed the ridge alone. Each step was slow, deliberate. The rocks shifted under her boots, whispering against one another. Her breath fogged in the cold. Above, the sky pressed heavy with silence. She found her perch, high, narrow, a ledge that overlooked the compound. She unfolded the bipod, adjusted the scope, settled her cheek against the stock. The rifle felt alive beneath her hands, pulsing with memory. Through the scope she saw them, her team moving low, approaching walls of stone and steel. She scanned the edges, the rooftops, the shadows. And then movement. Not her team, not theirs either, something else. Figures slipping along the ridge opposite, quiet, patient, watching. Her breath caught. She knew this silence. And in that moment she realized she hadn't told them the truth, not yet. Because this valley wasn't just a mission. It was a trap she had already survived once. And she wasn't sure she could survive it again. What was she hiding from them? The thought gnawed at her as she lay prone on the ridge, eye pressed to glass, rifle still, breath slow. Below, the compound sat silent, walls of mud and stone, roofs patched with tin, a single antenna jutting crooked against the pale sky. Her team moved carefully, shadows cutting across open ground. They thought they had surprise on their side. But Elena knew better. The figures she had glimpsed along the opposite ridge were gone now, melted back into stone, swallowed by silence. No trace, no sound. But she knew they hadn't left. She knew they were waiting. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, but she didn't fire. Not yet. Her comms crackled softly in her ear, Major Harlan's voice. "Raven, status." She exhaled, steady, all clear. The lie tasted like ash. Why hadn't she told them? Why did she hold it back, even as danger moved in the rocks above? Because if she spoke now, the questions would follow. How did she know? Why hadn't she said anything during the briefing? Why had she been silent when she could have changed their plan? And the answer to those questions was something she wasn't ready to give. Not yet. The wind shifted across the ridge. It carried scents, dust, smoke, something metallic. Elena's cheek pressed into stone, cold against her skin. She adjusted her scope, scanned the compound again. Her eyes caught on a doorway. Faint movement, just a flicker. A curtain swaying though no wind touched it. "Contact," she whispered to herself. She steadied her breath, waited, watched. Then two figures emerged. Men in loose clothing, rifles slung low, their pace casual, unhurried. They weren't guarding, they weren't patrolling, they were waiting. Her heartbeat slowed, not sped. A sniper's paradox. The closer danger came, the calmer she became. The world narrowed to angles and timing. But beneath that calm, something else stirred, a memory. A voice screaming her name across this very valley, boots sliding on gravel, the echo of gunfire in the cold. And then silence, so much silence, that she thought the earth itself had swallowed the sound. She blinked hard, pulled herself back. Focus, not then, now. She adjusted her scope again. Below, Major Harlan signaled the team forward. Hands chopped the air. Men spread wide, hugging walls. Collins, the young one, moved closest to the doorway. Too eager, too fast. She could see his nerves in every step. "Slow down," she whispered, though no one could hear. And then she saw it. Not in the doorway, not in the men, but in the dirt just ahead of him. A wire. Her body reacted before thought. "Collins, stop," she snapped into comms. He froze, boot hovering inches above the ground. Confusion filled his voice. "What?" "Mine," she hissed. "Wire at your feet." The channel erupted, voices shouting, commands colliding. Collins' face drained pale. Slowly, carefully, he stepped back. His breath fogged in the air. Silence followed, heavy, thick. Elena closed her eyes briefly. She had saved him, but now the questions would come. Sure enough, Harlan's voice hit her ear hard and sharp. "Raven, how the hell did you see that? You didn't call any movement earlier. What else aren't you telling us?" She swallowed, eyes still on her scope. "I'm telling you what matters. Stay sharp. You're not alone down there." A pause, static. His silence said enough. He didn't trust her. As the team adjusted, sweeping the area more carefully now, Elena's gaze drifted again to the opposite ridge. Still nothing, still silence. But she knew better. Because she had been there once. She had lain in that very spot, years ago, bleeding into the rocks, staring across the valley at the ridge she now occupied. She had been on the other side of this story. And no one here knew. No one except her. Night came slow. The sky burned orange, then bruised purple, then slipped into black. The compound lit faint with lantern glow, shadows moving inside. Her team dug in, settled into positions. The mission wasn't over. They still had to breach, still had to find what they came for, but darkness forced patience. Elena remained on the ridge, unmoving, unblinking. The hours stretched thin. The cold bit into her gloves. Her breath steamed against the scope, and in that silence her mind betrayed her. She thought of Anna, her sister. Small hands once gripping Elena's when they ran through streets at dusk, chasing laughter. Bright eyes, always curious, always alive. Until the war came. Until one night when Elena was already deployed and Anna was caught in the wrong place, the wrong time. The letter had reached Elena too late, the funeral even later. And she had sworn in that moment of unbearable loss that silence would never win again. That if she could not save Anna, she would save others, even if they never knew, even if her name was never spoken. But to do that, she had taken missions no one else would. Missions buried in shadows. Missions that led her here to this valley once before. Where she had failed. Her scar pulsed as if to remind her. And now she was back. With men who didn't trust her, with silence pressing down, with danger moving unseen. She shifted slightly on the ridge. Her bones ached, her eyes burned, but she kept watching. Because she knew what came next. It began near midnight. A flicker of light in the compound, a figure moving fast, another, then more, doors opening, shadows spilling, not random, not chaotic, coordinated. They knew. Elena's voice cut through comms. Movement inside, multiple, stay ready. The team stirred below, rifles raised, breath quickening. Colin's voice cracked slightly but steadied, positions holding. Through her scope, Elena tracked them. Men with weapons shifting in the dark, taking positions at windows, on roofs, setting the stage. Her stomach clenched. This wasn't defense, this was lure. And she realized the truth she hadn't spoken. This compound wasn't the target. It was the bait. Her finger brushed the trigger again, but she held. Shooting now would give away her perch. She needed to see. She needed to know. Her heart slowed, calm overtaking fear. She whispered to herself, not yet. But deep inside, a voice answered back. You're too late again. The first shot came not from her but from the dark. A crack split the silence. Stone burst near one of her men's heads. Shouts filled comms. Chaos erupted. Elena swung her scope, caught the glint of metal, the faint silhouette of a rifle muzzle on the opposite ridge. Her ridge once. She didn't hesitate, breath in, hold, squeeze. The shot rang out, a figure dropped. Silence again, then more fire from everywhere. The trap was sprung. And Elena whispered almost in prayer, stay alive. Because this time, she would not let the valley take them. Not like before. Not again. How fast can silence turn into chaos? 1 second the valley lay still, breathing its endless quiet. The next it roared. Gunfire cracked from every ridge, bullets chewing stone, sparks spitting in the dark. Echoes bounced so violently it felt as if the earth itself was firing. Elena pressed tight to the rock, rifle firm against her shoulder. Her scope cut through shadows, slicing the night into fragments. Targets moved fast, ducking, firing, vanishing. She tracked, she breathed, she squeezed. Each shot was steady, measured. Each hit rippled silence into stillness. But there were too many. Her comms burned with voices. Contact left. We're pinned, damn it, they're everywhere. Where the hell's fire support? Major Harlan's command voice fought to cut through the storm. Hold positions, cover your sectors. Raven, report. She stayed calm, eyes never leaving the scope. Opposite ridge, multiple shooters, they were waiting. You're supposed to. Not now, Harlan. Her words were sharp, colder than the night. Because the truth was useless now. Explanations wouldn't stop bullets. Survival depended on silence, aim, and trust. A trust that no one here seemed willing to give her. Except maybe one. Captain, Colin's voice, young and raw, cut across the channel. Where do you want me? She froze for half a beat. No one had asked her that before. Not in this mission. Not in any mission where men like Harlan claimed the air. Her instinct spoke before doubt. Right flank, 2 o'clock. Watch the rock outcrop. They'll push there next. He didn't question. Copy. Through her scope she saw him shift, crawl, plant himself low, weapon raised. His movements were clumsy but willing. Brave. And for a flicker of a second, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hoping. The firefight dragged minutes into hours. Time bent under the weight of fear. Bullets hissed. Dust stung the eyes. Muzzles lit like fireflies in the dark. Elena's shots found marks, 3, 4, maybe more. Each one slowed the storm but never stopped it. For every enemy she dropped, another shadow rose. Her cheek ached against the stock. Her hands stiffened from cold and tension. But she didn't break rhythm. Breathe, aim, squeeze, reset. And as she fired, her mind betrayed her again. The last time she was here. Blood in her mouth, the metallic taste, the screams of men she couldn't reach. Anna's name tearing from her lips even though Anna wasn't here, never was, never would be again. She had lain on the opposite ridge, helpless, body failing, watching as comrades fell one by one. She remembered crawling, dragging herself across gravel, nails broken, lungs on fire until blackness swallowed her. And waking later in a hospital bed, her chest stitched, her future uncertain. That night had branded her. The night she had lived while others hadn't. The night she swore she'd never return to this valley. And yet here she was. Her scope caught another silhouette. She pulled the trigger, the figure crumpled. And she whispered, "Not this time." Down below, Colin's voice broke in again, urgent. "Captain, you were right, they're moving on the flank." Through her scope she saw them, 3 shadows creeping low, weapons ready. Collins held his ground, firing bursts, forcing them back. He was terrified. She could see it in his jerky aim, his frantic reload. But he didn't run. "Steady," she whispered into comms, her tone low, soothing. "Wait for them to rise, they'll show themselves. Then breathe, one shot at a time." His breath crackled through static, ragged. Then slower, calmer, he listened. A figure rose, Collins fired, hit, the man dropped. Elena almost smiled, almost. Because in that moment, she saw what no one else had seen, what they refused to see. Collins trusted her. And trust was rarer than bullets. The team's perimeter bent but didn't break. Harlan barked orders, men obeyed, and somehow the chaos became rhythm. Explosions thundered from grenades tossed against stone. The compound flickered with shadow play, men darting, shouting, dying. Elena covered them all. She picked targets like a surgeon cutting sickness from flesh. Her body ached, her eyes blurred, but she didn't stop. Until the ridge opposite went quiet. No muzzle flashes, no movement. Just silence again. Too sudden, too complete. Her gut twisted. "Hold," she murmured into comms. "They're not done." Harlan snapped back. "Raven, we've got a window, we push now." "Wait," her voice cut like steel. "This isn't over." But Harlan was the man who waited. "Team, move, breach the compound." Shadows spilled forward, boots pounding dirt, rifles raised. Collins followed, slower, cautious, but he followed. Elena swore under her breath. Through her scope she scanned the compound. It looked empty, too empty. Windows dark, doors shut, not defense, not retreat. A lure. Her finger pressed to comms. "Stop, it's a kill zone." But her warning came too late. The ground erupted. Explosions tore through night, fire blooming from buried charges. Men flew, bodies flung like rag dolls. Dust swallowed the valley in a choking cloud. Screams filled the channel. Elena's chest clenched. Her eyes burned. She wanted to look away. She couldn't. She searched frantically through her scope. Shapes moved, her men broken, crawling, others not moving at all. And amid the chaos, Collins staggered upright, coughing, blood streaking his face. Still alive, still moving. "Captain," his voice was wild, panicked. They're all." "Stay down," she ordered. "Find cover now." He obeyed, stumbling behind rubble. His breaths came ragged through static. Elena scanned again. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from rage. She had seen this before. She had lived this before, and it was happening again because no one listened. Because silence had weight, and hers had cost them. The dust thinned, revealing shadows moving through it. Not her men, theirs, advancing, swift, merciless. Elena's rifle snapped left, right, center. Shots cracked, figures dropped, but for every one she hit, more came. Her comms filled with groans, cries, broken voices. A man begging for a medic who wasn't coming. Another praying under his breath. Collins whispering, "Don't let me die, don't let me die." She wanted to shout, to promise, to say she'd save them all. But words were fragile here. So instead she fired, again and again and again. Her magazine clicked empty. She reloaded in silence, hands mechanical, precise. Her body moved like memory, not thought. But her heart cracked with each voice that faded from comms, with each body that stilled in her scope. By dawn, the valley was quiet again. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of aftermath. Smoke curled from the compound. The earth still smoldered from blasts. Bodies lay strewn, hers and theirs, friend and foe indistinguishable in the stillness. Elena's eyes were dry, too dry. She couldn't cry anymore. She just stared through her scope, scanning, searching for movement that didn't come. And then one voice, weak, fragile. "Captain Collins." Her chest tightened. She found him through her scope, slumped against stone, rifle limp in his lap, blood soaking his arm, but alive. Barely. She pressed comms close, her voice low, steady. "I see you, hold on." He coughed, a sound like tearing paper. Are we the only ones?" Her throat closed, she couldn't answer. Because she didn't know. As the sun rose, painting the valley in cruel light, Elena knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't just another mission. This was the past come back to claim her. And if she didn't end it now, it would consume her again. She closed her eyes for half a breath, then opened them, and whispered to herself, to Anna, to the silence. "Not this time." How do you lead when no one believes in you? The valley still smoked from the night's violence. The stench of burned earth and blood hung heavy, thick enough to taste. Ash floated in the dawn air, settling on helmets, weapons, skin. Elena shifted on the ridge, eyes scanning the compound below. What had been a fortress of shadows now looked like a ruin. Walls blown open, doors blasted from hinges, dust rising in ghostly columns. The silence was brutal. She keyed her comms, report. For a long moment nothing, just static, then. "Collins, I'm here." His voice cracked, ragged but alive. A flicker of relief warmed her chest. Then another voice, strained, clipped, laced with anger. "Harlan, we've got wounded, bad." Elena's jaw tightened. "Who's still up?" A pause, shuffling, a groan in the background. Then Harlan again, grim. 3 moving, maybe 2 more alive but down hard. Everyone else. His words trailed, swallowed by silence. Elena closed her eyes. She had known. She had seen it coming, had warned him. But hearing it, knowing lives had been swallowed by arrogance and silence alike, it carved into her like shrapnel. She adjusted her rifle, slung it, and began descending the ridge. Each step was slow, deliberate, the rocks grinding under her boots. Her legs trembled with fatigue, but she forced them steady. She had to see. The ground told the story better than words ever could. Bodies lay twisted, their gear scattered, rifles half buried in dirt. Blood pooled in dark patches, drying in the morning chill. One man's helmet lay yards from his head. Another's hand still gripped a grenade pin he never had time to throw. Elena moved through it all in silence. She wanted to kneel, to close eyes, to whisper the words she had whispered for Anna once, but there were too many. Too much weight for one set of lips to carry. Her boots carried her toward the living. Harlan knelt by a man whose chest barely rose, pressing hands against blood-soaked fabric. His own face was smeared with dirt and fury. He looked up as she approached. "This is on you," he spat. Elena froze, her voice was low. "Excuse me. You saw something, you knew, and you didn't warn us until it was too late." Her chest tightened. "I warned you. You whispered doubts, you dropped half-truths, you—" His voice broke as the man beneath him shuddered, stilled. Harlan's hands trembled. He looked at them, red with blood, and his fury sharpened. "If you'd spoken clearly, if you'd told me what you knew, we'd have men standing now. Instead, look at this." He swept his arm toward the field of the dead. Elena's throat ached, but she held her ground. "And if you'd listened, fewer would be lying here." The air between them burned hotter than gunfire. Around them, the survivors were silent, too broken to take sides. Collins, slumped against rubble with his wounded arm, stared at her, not with anger, not with blame, but with something more dangerous: curiosity. because he knew there was more, that she carried something unspoken, something that could tilt the weight of truth. They regrouped inside the compound. The building groaned under the morning wind, walls cracked, windows shattered. Dust drifted through beams of light like smoke in a church. The survivors gathered in a circle, Harlan, Collins, and two others, both wounded but conscious. Faces pale, eyes hollow. They looked less like soldiers and more like men who had seen too much too fast. Harlan spoke first. "We can't hold here. They'll come again and we're too few. We move to extraction." One of the wounded men coughed blood into his hand. "Extractions 2 clicks out. We'll never make it carrying." "We leave no one," Harlan snapped. His eyes cut to Elena. "Even if some of us think silence is acceptable." Elena met his gaze, cold, steady. "You think silence killed them, but silence kept us alive as long as it did. If I'd shouted everything I knew at that table, you wouldn't have believed me anyway." "Then tell me now," Harlan growled. "What aren't you saying? Why do you look at this valley like it already owns you?" The room went still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Elena's hand brushed the scar along her rib. Her breath slowed. Her voice came low, flat, heavy. "Because I've been here before." Collins straightened, eyes sharp. The others stared. Harlan's jaw worked, disbelief and anger twisting his face. "That's impossible. Intel says." "Intel says what it always says," Elena cut in, her voice a blade. "Clean, precise, wrong." She looked around at them, her eyes dark, her words heavier than gunfire. "Years ago I walked into this same valley. Different team, different orders, same silence. And I watched men die in the same dirt you're standing on now." Her hand trembled as it rested on her rifle. "I shouldn't have made it out. I almost didn't, but I lived, alone." Collins whispered almost reverently, "That's why you knew." Elena nodded once. "I knew because I've seen this trap before. I felt it waiting, and I didn't say it aloud because," her voice cracked, barely audible, "because saying it means admitting I failed them. The men who came before you, the men I couldn't save." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. For a long while no one spoke. Dust drifted. The wounded groaned softly. Outside, the valley whispered in wind. Then Collins said, softly but firm, "You didn't fail us. You saved me." Elena looked at him. His face was pale, blood-streaked, but his eyes were steady, honest. "You saw the wire, you called it. If you hadn't," his breath hitched, "I'd be lying out there now." The weight in Elena's chest shifted, just slightly, a crack in the armor. Harlan's gaze softened, only for a second before hardening again. "Personal history or not, we're still trapped in this valley. We move or we die." Elena nodded slowly. "Then we move smart, not by your map, by memory." They left the compound at dusk, carrying the wounded on improvised stretchers. The air was cold, sharp, biting at lungs. Every step ground into bone. Elena led, silent, eyes scanning ridges and shadows. She remembered the paths that twisted unseen, the gullies that muffled sound, the rocks that swallowed footsteps. She remembered because she had once crawled them in blood, alone. Behind her, Collins limped but stayed upright, rifle clutched with his good arm. The others stumbled but moved. And Harlan, he followed, watching her, torn between suspicion and reluctant trust. The valley seemed endless. Every ridge felt like an eye, every shadow a breath waiting to strike. And in that quiet march, Elena's thoughts drifted again to Anna, to her father, to promises carved in grief. She had sworn never to return here, yet fate had dragged her back, maybe to break her, maybe to redeem her. She didn't know which. But she knew this. She would not let Collins fall. She would not let the wounded be swallowed by silence. Not this time. Even if it meant she didn't leave with them. By midnight they reached the edge of the valley. The extraction point lay ahead, across one last stretch of open ground, wide and exposed. Too wide. Elena froze, raised a fist. The group halted. Her eyes scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. No sound, too quiet. And she knew. "They're waiting," she whispered. Harlan stepped up beside her, jaw clenched. Then what? Elena's hand tightened on her rifle. She felt the scar pulse again, the memory of bleeding out under stars. She exhaled slowly. "Then I finish what I should have finished last time. What does it mean to carry ghosts in silence?" The night pressed in tight, the valley holding its breath. The extraction point lay just ahead, but it might as well have been an ocean away. A flat expanse of pale dirt stretched between the survivors and safety, open, exposed, unforgiving. No rocks, no gullies, no shadows to shield them. The kind of place where men disappeared. Elena knelt in the dirt, her rifle resting across her knees, her eyes sweeping the horizon. Nothing moved, no glint of scope, no flicker of light, but she knew they were out there, watching, waiting. Her scar pulsed, her memory whispering. Anna's laughter, the warmth of her small hand, the sudden silence when that warmth was stolen. She gritted her teeth, dragging her focus back. She could not let memory become distraction. Not here, not now. Harlan crouched beside her, his breath clouding in the cold air. His voice was low, edged with impatience. "We're sitting ducks here. We move fast, we might beat their trigger fingers." Elena shook her head. "That's what they want." Harlan glared at her. "Then what? Sit here and die slow." Collins limped forward, his face drawn, his arms still bound tight. "We need a plan, something that gives us a chance." His eyes flicked toward Elena, steady, trusting. "She's the only one who knows this place." The others, two men barely upright, pale with blood loss, watched her too. Their silence weighed heavier than their words. Harlan's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Not this time. Elena's throat tightened. Her chest felt heavy, as if she carried not only her pack, not only her rifle, but the ghosts of every man who had bled in this valley before. She closed her eyes. The darkness behind them pulled her backward, back to the last time she had stood on this same edge. It had been 5 years ago, a different night, a different team. The air then had smelled the same, cold, dry, filled with dust. She remembered their voices, low and strained. Sergeant Ramirez had whispered a joke, his teeth flashing white in the dark. Daniels had hummed under his breath to steady his nerves. And Elena, back then just a sharpshooter, not a leader, had been silent, always silent. They had crossed this same stretch of dirt, step after step, rifles tight, breath slow. And then the world had erupted. Muzzle flashes burst from the ridge. Bullets hissed like angry bees. Men dropped, Ramirez, Daniels, one after another. Screams tore the air, cut short, replaced by silence. Elena had hit the ground, face pressed into dirt, heart hammering. She remembered the taste of soil, the smell of blood. She remembered crawling, dragging herself through dust, feeling Anna's photo digging into her chest pocket. When it ended, when the silence fell again, she had been the only one breathing, the only one left. She had never forgiven herself. Her eyes snapped open. The present returned, Collins watching, Harlan glaring, the wounded waiting. She swallowed hard, her voice low, rough. "If we cross together, we die. If we stay, we die slower. Only one way gives us a chance." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "And what way is that?" Her hand brushed the scar at her side. Her chest rose, fell. She spoke the words she had once sworn never to say again. "I draw their fire." The silence that followed was sharp, jagged. Collins shook his head instantly. "No, no, you don't get to play martyr. We've lost too many already." Elena met his eyes. "This isn't martyrdom, it's math. They'll focus on the first target they see. That buys you time to move the wounded across." Harlan's voice was a growl. "You'll never make it." Her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Maybe I don't need to." The words hung between them, heavy, brutal, final. Collins took a step closer, his face drawn tight with anger and something deeper. "Why you? Why always you? You carry every weight like no one else can touch it. Why?" Elena's breath trembled. She looked away past him to the valley stretching before them. "Because I couldn't save them last time." Her voice broke, "and because I can't live knowing I failed again." The admission burned like fire in her chest, but once it was out she felt lighter. The truth, raw, jagged, ugly, was no longer only hers. Collins's eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. "If you go with a plan, not just to bleed in the dirt. You owe them that much." Elena nodded slowly. "Then listen." The plan was simple, too simple maybe, but in war simplicity often meant survival. She would move first, angled away from the extraction point, drawing fire toward the ridge line. Her rifle and her silence would keep them guessing. Meanwhile, Harlan, Collins, and the others would push the wounded straight across, fast as their bodies allowed. It was a gamble, but all war was gamble. When the plan was set, they sat in silence for a long moment. The night wind hissed across the dirt. The stars above were sharp and cold, indifferent to the lives below. Elena's fingers brushed the photo of Anna tucked in her chest pocket. Her throat ached, but she whispered so softly no one else could hear. "For you, little one, always for you." She rose, checked her rifle, adjusted the strap. Every motion felt slower than it should, deliberate, final. Collins caught her arm. His grip was weak but desperate. "Come back." Elena looked at him, saw the raw plea in his eyes, the human need for hope, even when hope was a lie. She didn't promise. She couldn't, but she squeezed his hand just once before pulling away. Then she stepped into the open. The first steps were silence. Only the crunch of her boots, the whisper of wind. Her eyes scanned the ridge, her ears straining for the sound she knew would come. Then it did. The crack of a rifle, the hiss of a bullet, dirt spat near her foot. She dropped low, rolled, fired back. The muzzle flash lit her face for a split second, sharp against the dark. Another shot, then another. The night erupted with gunfire, the air ripping, the dirt dancing with impacts. Behind her she heard it, the scuffle of boots, the grunt of men carrying weight, the low hiss of Harlan's orders. The team was moving. Elena kept firing, shifting, rolling, never still. Her mind quieted, her body a machine of instinct and memory. Each trigger pull was a heartbeat, each heartbeat a choice. And for the first time in 5 years, she didn't crawl to survive. She stood to shield. The ridge spat fire, her rifle answered. The night was alive with echoes. And in that chaos she felt it, the ghosts lifting just slightly, as if watching, as if forgiving. But then a shot found her. It punched into her side just beneath the scar. The force staggered her, dropping her to one knee. Pain flared, hot and sharp. Her hand pressed against it, warm blood soaking her glove. Her breath came ragged. She looked toward the extraction point. The others were running, stumbling, dragging the wounded. Collins looked back once, his face pale, his eyes wide. She waved him on. Then she turned back to the ridge, lifted her rifle and fired again. Her vision blurred, her body screamed, but her mind was steady. Because this was what she had carried all along. The weight, the silence, the ghosts, and now, finally, the chance to set them down. The gunfire slowed, then faltered. The ridge went quiet. Elena's rifle lowered. Her hand trembled. Her blood pooled in the dirt she had once crawled through. She lay back staring at the stars, sharp and cold. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. How long can a single heartbeat hold back silence? Elena's world shrank to the pulse in her ears, the sharp ache where the bullet had torn through her side. The stars above blurred, smearing like paint across a canvas. Her breath rasped shallow, each inhale tasting of dirt and iron. The ridge had gone quiet, too quiet. Her fingers still curled around the trigger, but she hadn't fired in seconds, maybe minutes. Time had fractured, slowed. Was this it? Her hand pressed into the wound, warm blood seeping through her glove. The pain was there, sharp, but underneath it something stranger stirred. A clarity. She thought of Anna, small hands clutching a stuffed bear, a laugh that filled the house with light. She thought of the last phone call with her father, his voice steady even as his lungs failed, telling her not to waste her strength on regret. And she thought of the men who had fallen here 5 years ago. Ramirez, Daniels, faces that lived in the corners of her dreams, never fatting, never forgiving. But tonight, maybe they would forgive. A distant sound cut through the haze, boots pounding, shouts. Collins's voice, raw, urgent, echoed faintly across the valley. "Elena, stay with me." She wanted to answer, but her throat wouldn't obey. Only a whisper escaped. "Go." Her body felt heavy, as if the earth itself was pulling her down. Yet her mind still fought, clawed, refusing to let go. Because a soldier doesn't surrender, not even to silence. The team staggered across the open ground. Harlan barked orders through clenched teeth, dragging one of the wounded with a grip that cut into his palms. Collins, half collapsed from his own blood loss, stumbled alongside, his eyes darting back toward where Elena had fallen. "Keep moving," Harlan growled, his voice raw. "Extractions close." She knew what she was doing. Collins spat dirt. "Like hell she did, she's still out there." One of the wounded groaned, coughing blood. The helicopter's distant thrum reached them, low at first, then growing, a promise of escape. Collins faltered, torn. His body screamed for rest, for safety, but his heart dragged him backward. He saw her silhouette in the dark, crumpled, still fighting alone. And in that moment, he knew. If she died, the valley would bury not just her, but every truth she had carried. He dropped his rifle into the dirt, shoved the stretcher into Harlan's arms. "Get them out," he rasped. "I'm not leaving her." Harlan's eyes blazed. "You'll die out there." Collins's voice cracked but didn't break. "Then I'll die where she is." And before Harlan could stop him, Collins turned and ran back into the night. Elena's vision swam. The ridge seemed to ripple, shadows bending, faces flickering in and out of the dark. Ghosts, Ramirez, Daniels, others watching her. She blinked, but they didn't fade. "Not yet," she whispered, the words slurred. "I'm not ready." Then hands gripped her shoulder, warm, real. "Elena, hey, stay with me." Collins's voice broke, desperate. He dropped beside her, his own blood soaking through his bandage, his breath ragged. Her eyes fluttered, barely focusing. "You should have gone." "And leave you here." His laugh was choked, angry. "Not a chance." He pressed his hands to her wound, ignoring her weak attempt to push him away. "You're not dying in this dirt, not like the others." Her lips trembled. "You don't know what this place takes." Collins leaned closer, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Then let's make it take nothing this time. Not you, not me, not anyone else." His words carved through the haze, sharp and stubborn. She wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't possible, but the way he looked at her, as if she was more than a soldier, more than silence, made her pause. For the first time in years, she felt seen. The ridge erupted again. Muzzle flashes cracked through the dark. Bullets tore the dirt around them. Collins swore, dragging Elena onto her side, shielding her with his own body. "Stay down." She coughed, forcing her voice through the pain. "No, give me the rifle." He hesitated, then saw the fire in her eyes, not fading, burning. He shoved the rifle into her hands. She braced it against her shoulder, grimacing as pain ripped through her side. Her breaths came shallow, but her aim was steady. One shot, then another. 2 figures on the ridge dropped. The rest fell back into silence. Elena's chest heaved, her body trembling. She lowered the rifle, whispering through bloodied lips, "Not this time, not again." Collins tightened his grip on her arm. "We've got to move. Extraction's waiting." She nodded weakly, and together they staggered up. Each step was agony. Collins half carried her, his own body nearly collapsing under the strain. The ground stretched endless, the helicopter's blades whipping dust into the air ahead. Harlan was already there, the wounded loaded, his face shadowed with fury and relief. When he saw Collins hauling Elena, his jaw clenched, his eyes flicking with something unspoken. Guilt, maybe, respect buried deep. "Move," he barked, but his voice cracked. They stumbled the last stretch, the helicopter's roar deafening, the night sky alive with wind and dust. Soldiers reached out, pulling Elena and Collins aboard. As the bird lifted, Elena collapsed against the cold metal floor, her breath shallow, her skin pale. Collins gripped her hand, refusing to let go. "You made it, do you hear me? You made it." Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, just a moment, she believed him. The helicopter cut across the valley, engines screaming against the dark. Below, the ridge shrank, swallowed by shadow. Elena's gaze lingered on it, her vision dim. She thought of the ghosts, of Ramirez and Daniels, of Anna's laughter echoing faint. Maybe they were still with her. Maybe they always had been. Her hand tightened weakly around Collins. And then, for the first time in years, she let her eyes close, not in surrender but in rest. Collins sat beside her, refusing to move, even as medics swarmed. Harlan stood near the door, his face carved with shadows. He looked at Elena, then at the valley fatting behind them, and his shoulders sagged. For the first time, he didn't see her as a ghost. He saw her as the reason they were alive. But he said nothing, not yet. Because some truths weren't spoken in words. They lived in silence. And in that silence, Elena breathed. What happens when survival feels heavier than death? The helicopter's roar had long since faded, replaced by the sterile hum of machines. The air no longer smelled of dust or blood, but of antiseptic and bleach. White walls, harsh lights, a place meant for healing, yet Elena felt no peace. She lay still, ribs bandaged, IV dripping slow. Every breath was shallow, pulled through teeth clenched against pain. Her body had been patched, but her mind still lay in the valley. Her eyes tracked the ceiling tiles, each one a marker, a count of hours lost. She heard footsteps in the hallway, doors opening, closing, voices muffled. But no sound was louder than the silence of memory. The silence of Ramirez falling, Daniel screaming, the silence of Anna's laughter cut too short. Collins came first. His arm was in a sling, his face pale, but his steps were steady. He pulled a chair to her bedside, sitting heavy, like a man who had walked through fire and still smelled the smoke. For a moment he said nothing. He just looked at her, eyes searching, as if afraid she'd vanish if he blinked. Then softly, "You scared the hell out of me." Elena's lips twitched, a shadow of a smile. "That makes two of us." Collins shook his head. "You don't get it. I thought you were gone. I thought I was dragging a body." His throat tightened, his voice rough. "You can't keep carrying death like it belongs to you. It doesn't." She looked away, her gaze fixed on the blank wall. "You don't know what belongs to me." "Yes, I do." His voice rose, then softened. "You think I didn't see it? The way you look at the dirt like it remembers you. The way you hold silence like a weapon. You're still living in that valley, Elena. Even here in this bed, you're there." Her chest ached, but not from the wound. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Maybe that's where I belong." Collins leaned forward, his hand brushing hers. "No, you belong here, breathing, alive with us." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself step out of the valley, but ghosts don't loosen their grip easily. Days blurred. Nurses came and went, changing bandages, checking vitals. Soldiers visited, offering nods, half smiles, words she barely remembered. But when the room emptied, the silence returned. And in that silence she dreamed. The dreams were vivid. Ramirez, Daniels, the whole team, faces lit by muzzle flashes, then swallowed by shadow. They spoke to her without sound, their mouths moving, their eyes accusing. Sometimes Anna was there too, her little hands outstretched, her laughter echoing until it cut into screams. Elena woke each time with her chest heaving, sweat dampening her sheets. The pain in her side was nothing compared to the ache in her soul. Harlan came on the fifth night. He didn't knock. He didn't bring flowers or fruit or hollow words. He just stepped inside, boots heavy, eyes shadowed. He stood at the foot of her bed, silent for a long time. Elena met his gaze, steady despite the fatigue etched into her face. Finally he spoke. "I misjudged you." She said nothing. "You warned me, I didn't listen." His jaw tightened, "and men died for it." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to say the blame was hers too, but his eyes, dark, raw, stopped her. He took a slow breath. "I called you a ghost, said you were hiding, but you were the only one carrying truth." Silence stretched between them, thick with all the words neither could say. Then he added almost quietly, "Thank you for saving the ones you could." Elena's eyes burned, but she blinked the heat away. She gave a small nod, nothing more. Harlan left without another word, his boots echoing down the hall. And in that echo she heard something she hadn't expected: respect. Weeks passed. Her wounds closed, scars forming where flesh had torn. She could walk again, slow and halting. The hospital corridors felt endless, their fluorescent lights cold, but each step was a small defiance. Collins often walked beside her, patient with her silence, filling it with stories. He spoke of home, his father's old fishing boat, his sister's wedding he had missed, the dog that still waited by the door each night. He told her not because he expected answers, but because he wanted her to remember the world outside the valley. One night, as they paused by a window, the city lights glowing far below, Collins said softly, "You don't talk much about Anna." Elena froze, her hands curled against the windowsill. He continued gently, "But I hear her in the way you breathe, in the way you fight. She's in everything you do." Her throat tightened. The name alone was enough to unravel her. "She was 5, Elena whispered, her voice breaking. 5 years old. One moment she was laughing and the next gone, taken by something senseless, something I couldn't fight." Her hands trembled. "I joined because I thought maybe if I fought hard enough somewhere else I could make sense of it, balance the scales. But the truth is," her breath hitched, "you can't balance what's already broken." Collins's eyes glistened, but his voice was steady. "No, but you can carry her forward. You've been fighting ghosts, Elena, but maybe it's time to fight for her instead." The words sank deep. They hurt, they healed, both at once. She turned her face back to the window, the city shimmering. For the first time in years, the lights didn't look like distant stars mocking her. They looked like something she could reach for. Her return to the unit wasn't greeted with applause or ceremony. Soldiers don't celebrate survival the way civilians imagine. They nodded. They clapped her shoulder. They looked at her scars, then at their own, and understood without words. But Collins stayed close, a steady presence. And Harlan, though still distant, carried a new weight in his voice when he addressed her. Less command, more respect. Elena felt the shift, small but real. Yet at night when she lay in her bunk, silence still crept in. The valley still called. The ghosts still whispered. She knew she wasn't free, not yet. It wasn't until months later, when orders came again, that she realized the truth. A new mission, a new valley, different dirt but the same weight. As she checked her rifle, strapped her gear, she felt the scar tug at her side. She touched it, steadying herself. This time she thought, "It won't own me." She glanced at Collins, who tightened his sling, nodding once, and at Harlan, who gave her a look that carried no anger, only trust. For the first time in years, Elena felt something unfamiliar. Not hope, not yet, but direction. Maybe ghosts didn't fade. Maybe they walked beside you, silent, unseen. But they didn't have to chain you. That night before Wheels Up, she found herself staring at Anna's photo, the edges worn soft from years, in her pocket. She whispered into the dark, her voice trembling but steady. "I'll carry you, but I'll live too." And for the first time, the silence answered not with accusation, but with peace. The desert wind carried a strange stillness that night, the kind that made every sound echo louder than it should. The whir of rotors, the click of gear, the crunch of boots on gravel, it all felt magnified, as if the earth itself wanted to remember. Elena stood on the tarmac, helmet tucked beneath her arm, rifle slung across her shoulder. The scars beneath her uniform itched in the dry air, a reminder of wounds that had healed in flesh but not in spirit. The squad around her moved with quiet discipline, each soldier caught in their own ritual before the mission. Collins tightened his straps, muttering under his breath. Harlan checked his men with sharp eyes, his authority tempered now by something quieter, something earned through loss. But Elena, she simply breathed. Months had passed since the valley, since the night she nearly bled into the dirt, since the faces of Ramirez and Daniels had burned themselves into her dreams. The hospital walls had faded, but the silence had not. It never truly left. Only now she understood. Maybe it wasn't meant to. The helicopter lifted, rotors slicing the night, wind battering her face as she leaned against the steel frame. The city lights fell away, shrinking into constellations, then into nothing but darkness. Ahead lay another mission, another unknown. She didn't ask why anymore. Not the way she once did. Some questions didn't have answers. Her eyes drifted to Collins, seated across from her, eyes closed but lips moving faintly, prayers or promises, she couldn't tell. She found herself grateful for his presence, for the stubborn way he had refused to let her disappear into herself. And then her gaze shifted to Harlan. He caught her looking. For a moment neither said a word. Then he gave her a short, deliberate nod, not a command, not an order, a recognition. Something fragile stirred in her chest, trust. The mission unfolded in fragments of motion and silence, insertion through rough terrain, the hiss of radios, the crunch of boots against stone. Every step echoed the valley, but Elena carried herself differently now. Her hands were steady on the rifle, her breathing measured. The ghosts walked beside her, but they no longer pressed against her shoulders. They had weight, yes, but not control. The firefight, when it came, was brutal but brief. Gunfire cracked, grenades shook the earth, the night split open in chaos. Elena moved like water, precise, cold, unyielding. One shot, then another, her scope found its mark. And when the dust settled, when silence returned, she was still standing, alive, present. Later, under a fractured moon, Collins sat beside her on a rocky ledge. Their breaths rose into the night, mingling with the smoke that drifted from the valley below. "You're quieter than usual," he said softly. Elena gave a small shrug. "There's nothing left to say." He studied her, his eyes searching. "No, there's plenty. You just don't feel the need to carry it alone anymore." Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Maybe." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was a silence that didn't accuse, didn't condemn. A silence that allowed breath, allowed presence. When they returned to base, she found herself alone in her quarters, the walls bare, the cot stiff. She pulled Anna's photograph from her pocket, the same worn edges, the same small smile frozen in time. For years, that photo had been a wound she couldn't close, a voice she couldn't silence. But now, as she traced the faded outline, she whispered, "I'll carry you, always, but I'll live too." And for the first time, the silence answered not with pain but with peace. The war didn't end, the missions didn't stop, the ghosts didn't vanish. But Elena changed. She no longer fought for redemption she would never find. She no longer carried death as if it belonged to her. She fought for the living, for the ones beside her, for the laughter she once lost and the voices she still had. And in that, she found something close to freedom. Years later, those who served beside her would speak of her not in loud declarations, but in hushed tones. They would remember her steady hands, her unflinching presence, the way she moved through battle like silence itself. They would call her many things: sniper, soldier, survivor. But none would capture the truth. Elena was not fighting for herself. She was fighting for those who couldn't. And in the stillness of night, when the wind carried nothing but memory, the world seemed to remember her too. End of story.